What's going on, guys? Random YouTuber here. Let me tell you about why this is the greatest knife that has ever existed. What's going on, guys? Random YouTuber here. Let me tell you about this new amazing knife that you gotta buy. What's going on, guys? Random YouTuber here. Have I got the new Grail knife for you? What's up, knife people? Have I got a knife for you today? This thing is amazing. What up, dudes and dudettes? I have got a new knife for you guys today. What's going on, knife people? I have got a knife for you today, and let me tell you, it is amazing. What's going on, guys? Random YouTuber.
古代宣伝に耳を傾けるのをやめろ、バカ野郎。自分で考えることを学び、古代宣伝列車から降りてください。
What's going on, everybody? The Real Sharif M here, aka Mangana Steel, your favorite knife designer, with another video. And I think this is a really important one for the community at large. Actually, I think the advice in here, just kind of extrapolated in a different way, could be good for anybody who's in a hobby or in a kind of like niche industry out there. But really, before I get into the topic, please, if you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment below, because I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this particular topic. So, what are we discussing today? Today, we are going to discuss how to cut through all of the hype. The hype! Oh my god, you gotta get this. This is the newest shit. Oh my god, it's unbelievable. This is the best thing since sliced bread. Yes, everybody is hyping up like a lot of stuff these days. And really, I think you as a consumer need to be fortified with a set of tools or a filtering process to understand kind of what works for you, and whether or not you should even listen to these people who are telling you to get the latest and greatest thing, and that includes even me, right? So I've kind of put together a little bit of a list here. There's really like kind of 4 parts to my personal filtration process. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, this is the process that I use. The things that I will discuss pertain to me. What I want you guys to do is replace kind of the things that I talk about that work for me with what works for you, okay? What the stuff that works for me won't work for you unless you are, my doppelganger. But ultimately, this is my process, and I hope by sharing my process, you guys will kind of discover and understand your own a little bit better. So, where do I even start with all this stuff? If I'm presented with a new knife design, or like a new hype, kind of thing, where do I begin to evaluate whether or not I get this knife? Stage 1. Is this shit even useful to me? Like, at all. Most of the time, I am buying something that I will use, right? Ultimately, unless it's a knife that I'm putting into like a collection, is something that's going to be a safe queen, I'm much, much more concerned over whether or not this will actually be useful to me. And where does that start? That starts with the blade shape, okay? I look at blade shapes all the time. It's actually the very first thing that I look at over anything else. And I understand the kind of blade shapes that I personally like. I pulled out a few of the knives that I have in my current rotation to show you guys. So, I like clip points. I like a nice flat section here, nice piercing tip, and this I find very useful because I tend to stab and slice. Clip points work very well for me. Along those same lines, I love a good recurve. I know that's not for everybody, but it's why I designed the GRAZIOSO that way. Because again, you have a nice distal taper here, And a recurve allows you to penetrate the media that you're going to cut, and the recurve traps the material right through here and allows me to power through very, very easily. What else do I like? I tend to like American Tontos, right? That's why I designed the Kaimano this way. I like to use the nice flat section here through, putting maximum torque down through what I'm cutting, especially stuff like cardboard. I like the really nice pokey tip, but I also use this sort of transitionary edge for dipping that into, let's say, a package, instead of having to rotate all the way over to the tip in order to cut something. So that's one of the reasons, or the reasons I like an American Tonto. If I do more of like a drop point style blade, I tend to like something like this, the Ace Nazca, where I have a nice, broad, continuous cutting edge here, and again, pokey tip, nice distal taper all the way to the end. And this works very much like the other knives for me, where I can penetrate the media and slice through without it falling off of the edge too much, right? And last but not least, I like me a good Wharncliffe, as long as it's nice and pokey, just like this Yojimbo. So I always start by looking at the blade shape and understanding, like, okay, is that going to be useful for me and the way I tend to use knives? This is an area that I don't think a lot of people put enough thought into, and they just buy whatever kind of looks cool to them, and you end up getting stuff that, you may not be as useful to you. So, for example, here's a phenomenal knife, but I know this is not a knife that is useful for me because the tip doesn't have enough sort of penetrating ability for me to horizontally pierce through it, right? I've got to kind of like cock over and kind of like slice it a little bit in order to open a hole, and it's just not how I tend to like to use knives. Now, is there anything fundamentally wrong with this kind of like sheep's footy blade profile? None whatsoever. I know a ton of people love them. It's just not for me. If you look at what I design, you look at what I buy, almost exclusively pokey tips, So I start there, and then I look kind of at the base of the blade, and so on and so forth, right? And after that, it's kind of like, what are you willing to take a chance on? There are some things that are a little bit different, a little bit out there. Or, for example, like the Chavez, while it does have a nice flat section here, it does have a belly that kind of falls off. And I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I was willing to take a chance. And I actually I did end up really liking this knife quite a bit. So even though this doesn't fall into the previous categories, I took a chance on this and I ended up liking it. And part of what really helped that was the overall length of the blade, because I don't end up here towards the belly as much. So I always start, first and foremost, does the blade shape work for me, right? And that's always absolutely most important. After that, I start getting into, does the handle shape work for me? And not all handle shapes work for me at all, right? One of the things that I always look for, because I have extra large to double extra large hands, is I look for a handle length of at least 4.25 inches, 4¼ inches, okay? I know that at that, I am at least going to end up with the edge of the knife right about there. Pretty consistently, actually. And that's just enough for me. I don't need it to stick out like a huge amount past my pinky in order for me to maintain control over the knife. But it's got to at least hit that mark, So I can get a nice 4-finger grip, and you can see, even with the Grazioso, it's right at the end of my pinky. Just enough for me to maintain a good, nice 4-finger grip. And now, everybody's hand sizes are different from one another, so you need to know what that number is for you, right? Part of the problem is that there are a lot of YouTubers with different hand sizes, and they don't mention at all when they do the reviews what their hand sizes are. So we tend to get a lot of people saying, oh, I watched this person's review, I bought the knife on their recommendation, and it doesn't work for me. That's why, right? Like when I used to watch Nick Shabazz all the time, I thought he had at least large to almost extra large hands. And then I bought a knife or two on his recommendation, and I realized he has medium-sized hands. And there's no judgment in that. It's just that, like, our hand sizes didn't match up. And so I had to start looking at other reviewers to see, okay, well, me and Nick's hands aren't the same sizes, so I can't really trust for him to say that the ergonomics are perfect because it wouldn't match with me. So, like I said, is it a blade shape that works? Is it a handle shape that works? And also, when it comes to handle shapes that work, I tend to prefer more neutral handle shapes. You start there, and that's half the battle, actually, of determining of whether or not this latest hype knife is going to be good for you. All right? Second one is absolutely subjective, and does it look good? You know, you gotta like the knife that you buy. And I know beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but some stuff is just straight up ugly. And don't let the knife reviewers, you know, tell you what to like, okay? Personally, for me, I'm not going to, like, call anybody out, but there's some stuff that I like that other people think is ridiculous. I like the Chavez pocket clip. A lot of people don't like it, but I do, right? I think this thing is awesome. Some people have seen the Veloce, and they don't like the blade shape. They think it's, like, too thin or whatever. That's up to you, you know, but you got to determine whether the knife looks good for you, because you're going to be the one who's going to be owning it, and, you know, you gotta like what you buy, you know. I can honestly say maybe the only knife that I bought that I kind of regretted buying, even just from, like, an aesthetics point of view, was the CRKT Polar, okay? I don't know. It just never gelled with me. Don't at me in the comments, you know, but it didn't have a blade shape ultimately that I liked, and just the aesthetics just didn't really do it for me. And the handle shape was off. Now, number three. Is the price nice? Okay? Let's be honest here. Between all of us, a knife will knife at any price point. Okay? It doesn't matter if you're spending $400 or you're spending $1,500. Okay? But do realize that you do, on some level, get what you pay for. Okay? If you care about materials, if you care about steels, heat treat, precision tolerances, or even like a unique design, then you gotta expect to pay a premium. I'm sorry. And stop bitching about it, right? Like, that's the reality of the situation, right? When you start getting into specialized materials, like, for example, this crew wear, or you start getting into stuff like titanium and marbled carbon fiber, you know, or you start getting into unique designs like the Chavez, that's part of what comes with the territory. You're going to end up paying a premium. And especially if you want something that is more precision, because ultimately that requires more machine time, that requires more, you know, effort by the CNC and the CNC operators. So really, it's what comes with the territory. And if you're not comfortable with spending the kind of money for, you know, a Chavez, then just say, it's not for me. I don't feel I can justify it, and then move on, right? And at the end of the day, there should be no shame in that, you know? Like, for me, I use this a lot. This is a $40 knife. It's a $40 knife. My kitchen beater knife that I use for everything and anything is my Ontario rat, and there should be no shame in that, right? A knife will knife regardless of the price point. But if you are going to start getting into higher price points, then you gotta justify that for yourself, okay? Now, last but not least, there's section number 4, right? Section number 4 is just be honest with yourself. Do you need it, want it, or is there something you'd rather have more, okay? This is the hardest one because really a lot of people get dazzled by the latest, newest, and greatest thing. But you got to be honest with yourself. If you want something, for example, like a Shirogorov, right? Then stop buying hype knives and save up for it, right? You know, you can pass on 5 $300 knives over the course of a year and afford a Shirogorov. You can pass on like $20 $70 knives and get a Shirogorov at the end of the year, right? So if that's really your goal, save up for it, you know? These new little budget things that you're going to get are not going to be as nice or as good as a Shiro. Like, it's just the way it is. So you got to say, like, okay, do I want it? Do I need it? Is it going to serve a purpose for me? Or am I ultimately trying to get to another territory where, man, I want to be a Shiro owner, okay? Like, I hate seeing this in the community where people will act like a Shiro is Unobtainium, and then they're sitting there and they're buying every, like, $300 knife that comes out, you know? Like, it's not Unobtainium. You are just making excuses for, like, justifying not buying it for yourself, right? Like, yes, it's a lot of money. $1,500 for a knife is a lot of money. Of course, I'm not blind to that fact whatsoever, right? But with you're sitting there with your $500 $300 knives, you have just now spent the same amount of money. Are those $500 $300 knives giving you the same amount of joy in ownership as the one Shiro? That's a determination you got to make for yourself. As somebody who recently purchased one, I can tell you it was worth it. All of last year, I bought 4 knives. That's it. I bought 4 knives. All of them were below $300. And I was very happy with that. I passed on so much stuff, you know, and I ended up getting myself a Shiro, 1 of 100 in the world. I know that over time that investment, like if I really wanted to turn around and sell that knife tomorrow, I could almost sell it for double what I paid for it, you know, and the joy that it brings me is absolutely worthwhile. So it's not a flex, but it's just to show you that kind of practicing a little bit of self-restraint and getting what you really want to get versus, you know, getting what, you know, is the latest hype may be worthwhile, you know. Now, having said all of that, there's nothing wrong with collecting budget knives or, you know, like mid-range premium knives, but just know that they're not going to be the same as levels above. Like I talked about before, if you want precision tolerances, unique designs, etc., you ultimately have to pay for those things. Now, last but not least on all of this in the section 4 is sometimes it's worthwhile to take a chance and get out of your comfort zone. I did that when I got the EXO. When I first saw this thing, I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't understand why anybody would want it. But you know what? I got it. I love it. It's one of my favorite little EDC carries right now, despite the potential trouble I could get into carrying it. But it is, you know, outside of my comfort zone, and I ended up not regretting it whatsoever. So sometimes it's worth it. But the reason I got this is because I don't have anything like it. I genuinely don't. And as you can see from even the knives that I showed you, each one is kind of unique in its own right. And I don't have a duplicate of any single one of these in my entire collection. There's no other knife that does what these particular knives do. All of this is to say, stop buying knives that are basically the same. If you've got a bug out, a drop bear, an escort, and all of this stuff, I mean, they're essentially the same knives, you know, just in different proportions and, you know, handling sort of characteristics. Stop buying the same things. You know, and that will help you broaden your horizons and try new stuff and, you know, get out of the hype loops, okay? So I hope you guys found this video, you know, even remotely useful. I know there was a lot of stuff to cover in a relatively short time, but this is kind of how I filter through. And dude, in every single one of these things, I've fallen into those traps, which is why I know that this is my list for filtering things out now. You know, I had 4 drop points all doing the same thing. I started buying just knives that were just really cheap and buying a ton and a ton. I have a basket of knives in the kitchen right now that are just like beater cheap, you know, like $20, $30, $40 knives, you know, that like me and my family, we just abuse because, you know, I have them, I can't sell them, I can't move them. You know, I made all of the mistakes that I kind of asked you guys or offered to you guys as a filter, you know. So hopefully, you know, you guys will apply this filter for yourself and kind of look at and see what is worth getting and what's not worth getting from the hype train out there.